get a motion to refer this or consider this. I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Richardson, what does comprehensive service in general industrial, that designation actually mean?
Thank you, Worship. That designation provides for the protection of environmental and associated areas, but also allows for service and general industrial uses consistent with the Gloucester Plan.
Okay, so I think that's an important distinction here. Is there a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Rent moves it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. So I'm going to clear the queue. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
On the main motion?
The main motion, yeah. There is a referral coming, however.
Okay, before the referral comes...
it's actually an amendment, just to be clear. So it's an amendment, but you'll understand it when we think we get there. But go ahead, if you wish to speak to the main motion.
I look forward to it. But I think that my main concern, and I think that there's going to be sides that it won't appease, and if if both sides are unhappy, then you're probably doing something wrong. It's probably not the right saying, but my biggest concern with this application as it stands, Lot 5 on the north side of the, I'll call it central piece of this application, it's about 8.4 acres. To me, that, from my understanding from conversations with people who are very well versed in the field, it contains a lot of the most sensitive parts of the ecosystem as I understand it. It contains a lot of natural drainage, a lot of natural detention that I think would be quite problematic if we got rid of. And so not sure on the exact mechanism, Your Worship, through staff, but I'd be, depending on what this amendment / referral is going to look like, I'd be interested in seeing that piece removed from the application.
Okay, I understand. So do you know the speakers? I'm going to, Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to know, because there was a lot of comments made at the public hearing around in perpetuity and what that means, what it covers, and where it covers. And I was wondering, did we get any clarification on that? Or is that what the referral's about?
Mr. Richardson?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Richter, from recollection, the in perpetuity amount item was pertaining to the original provision of the lands and their designation as golf course. That is separate, though, and distinct from a zoning that's currently in place and any sort of legal instruments that are in place with respect to that. So there's no current information the staff understands that has a in perpetuity clause with respect to the prohibition of subsequent development applications.
Councillor Richter?
Okay, so you're obviously aware that there's a referral motion coming. The rest of I haven't been privy to it. Do we have an idea of what that referral motion is?
I'm about to make it, Councillor Richter, once you're concluded on the main motion.
All right, well, I'm not concluded on the main motion because these wetlands need to be protected and they need to be retained. And we're just continuing to hurt the environment, I think, in pursuit of the almighty dollar. And that's wrong. That's wrong for future generations. That's wrong for this generation. So I'm not going to vote to give it third reading. I'll vote to refer it to get clarification on a lot of the issues that came out of the public hearing, because I think we need to have that clarification before a vote is made.
Okay, I understand. So I'm going to move an amendment. I think I just want to clarify, because it's an amendment to the motion. The amendment will read that Council grant third and final reading to OCP Amendment Bylaw 5885, and we'll slow this down, everybody can understand this, to OCP Amendment Bylaw 5885, that the Council defer consideration of third reading of rezoning Bylaw 5886, subject to the confirmation and provision of the required senior government environmental approvals, and that the subject development prerequisites apply to rezoning Bylaw 5886. I so move. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on the referral? The amendment. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I don't know what it means.
Mr. Backen.
I don't think we should be voting on it today because If I've been here for 24 years and I don't know what this means, there's something wrong with us voting on it on the fly.
Mr. Baggett, maybe you could explain it. It's an amendment to grant third and final reading to the OCP amendment and to defer the rezoning application to the province, essentially.
I think that's correct. I'll have Mr. Richardson help, but as I understand it, that the official community plan amendment is proceeding to be granted third and final. However, the rezoning is being deferred until there can be a determination by senior government approvals as to what would be appropriate to be rezoned, if you will, to take into account the setbacks, the environmental impacts, and to provide their advice in terms of what the appropriate rezone should actually be.
That's the intent.
So basically, this motion is pushing it off onto another level of government.
Would you phrase it that way, Mr. Bracken? Pushing it off or butting out of streams, as we were told to do?
I would take it as being seeking the guidance of the senior level of government in terms of what actually is permissible from their perspective, given the regulatory structure that's in place for both environmental and fisheries, for this matter to be considered and them to advise what would be appropriate in the circumstances.
Did you believe? I mean, I think it's fair in the conversations I've had that researching this one pretty thoroughly that we're being requested by the proponent to effectively grant third reading for some percentage of acreage, subject to provincial approval. Is that fair? And so why not have the province adjudicate the concerns raised around wetlands and preservation and conservation? I'm not going to get into a back and forth with Mr. White or anyone else. Why not allow the province to render their approval or not approval, and then they can come back to us and say what they're prepared to approve? Is that reasonably what would occur anyway?
Correct. The overall designations are there, but what's actually going to be permissible for development would depend upon the regulatory structure that's in place.
And the designation allows for 0.1% industrial and 99.9% conservation, if so determined by the province.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, but why would we grant it third reading now without hearing from the ministry first?
So, Mr. Back, we need to clarify that we're not granting this amendment. Would not.
I don't have a copy of the motion in front of me, but I started writing down grant third reading of bylaw 585, whatever.
585 is the OCP amendment bylaw.
So why would we approve any bylaw until we have the clarifications that we need? I don't object to getting clarification from a higher level of government, but I do object to placing ourselves in a situation where we could end up in a lawsuit because we've granted third reading for them to go ahead and do something. And then we're saying, well, but the ministry can step in and rule it out of order, in which case I'm sure the proponent then has an argument to take us all to court.
Mr. Bragg, you may need to explain it a second time.
I'll try it this way. I think there's a confusion between the designation and the use. Generally, the senior levels of government do not like to providing, advice in a vacuum. So what effectively council is doing with 5885 is saying the designation would be acceptable to them, to council. However, the rezoning, the actual use, is something that must be determined after consultation with the senior levels of government. So as was referenced, they could indicate that there is a small area, a large area. They have to take into account the setbacks, the environmental impacts, those areas which are effectively the wetlands, and then at that point it would be up to them to come back and advise us in terms of what areas that would be prudent or appropriate and which ones would not.
Okay, so in that case, is there any reason why I can't amend this to strike the word grant third reading and use the word defer third reading pending a referral to higher levels of government for clarification?
To me, that would be a substantially different motion. We could certainly divide it and you could simply vote against the first part.
We're talking about a piece of land that has holistic value. This is not about, I don't think we should be running the risk with this. What is wrong with deferring third reading and referring for a second opinion? Is there anything legally that would prevent us from doing that?
Mr. Backen?
It's the will of council to determine what they want to refer or to grant. The only subject I would add is that the province or the federal government, any senior level of government, is looking for some indication as to what the local government is considering. So in that way, the designation as being appropriate is seen as being different than the use, because the designation says, yes, this is something we'll consider subject to the regulatory environment.
Okay, that's legalese that I don't understand. Like, what is the actual outcome or effect?
So council can defer or grant anything. The council has that jurisdiction, but you're asking the province or the federal government in this case, because it could include fisheries, whether for advice as to a designation. Whereas generally speaking, it would be the municipality that would say, hey, we're interested in this designation, but can you help us as to the specifics of within that designator, what's appropriate for consideration of further development.
So we're not breaking any rules if we strike grant and put defer until the referral response comes in.
That's correct. Council can defer or grant. That's within council's jurisdiction.
Okay, but this motion had grant and then refer.
And that's also within council's jurisdiction. It's becoming a policy issue for council to determine.
Okay, so, but we could change it to defer and leave the refer one in.
That would be what council could consider, subject to the direction of the chair in terms of the interpretation of the motion.
So just to clarify, the second part is to defer consideration of third reading, subject to the confirmation and provision by inference by the proponents, so subject to the confirmation and provision of the required senior government environmental approvals. So it's a deferral of the rezoning application, and it completes the OCP amendment.
Okay, and completing the OCP amendment does what?
Mr.
It gives
Bracken?
somebody else the...
It creates the designation that this area is acceptable for consideration of the existing Gloucester community, the Gloucester Industrial Park uses.
And I think it'd be good to clarify with Mr. Richardson that the designation is a combination of conservation and industrial as determined by the senior levels of government. Mr. Richardson.
To your worship, that's correct. There's some very specific language in the text that indicates following dedication of water course conservation areas, your worship.
So this could result, if the province comes back and says that it's 99% conservation, that would comply with the designation. Is that correct, Mr. Richardson?
That's correct, your worship.
That's the intent, Councilor Richter.
Okay, I think that what we should be doing is deferring this whole grant and defer motion for another meeting so that council can have the actual motion in front of them and have time to study the wording of the motion and understand it.
So you'd like to come back and move deferral of this for one council meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I can come back.
So as long as we can get the actual wording of the motion, and Mr. Backen, we haven't granted anything at this point, are we allowed to get clarification on the wording and what it means?
Ms. Bauer, are you able to read back the motion? I mean, it's been, I think, asked and answered, I think almost 3 times now.
Oh, stop with the ask and answered. I'm not clear. I wouldn't keep asking questions if I was clear.
I don't know how much more we can outline what an OCP amendment is. I'm trying to help, but. Ms. Bauer, do you have the motion to read back for council?
It's essentially to defer this motion to the next council meeting?
No, that's the original amendment. You have that.
Yes.
You can read that back
Okay.
again.
Thank you.
We have not taken a deferral motion. At this
Okay, thank you. That council give third and final reading to Langley Official Community Plan Bylaw 1979.
No. Do we just provide a written copy? Would that be easier?
Yeah, well, why don't we all get a written copy and have a week or 2 weeks or however long it is between now and the next meeting, the chance to review.
As I said, Councilor Richter, you can move deferral.
I will move deferral.
We have other
for
speakers
1
that
week.
are members of council, not just yourself. Can I come back to you? Can I come back to you? Councilor Van Popta, go ahead.
So part of it was reiterated by Mayor Woodward. For my own confirmation, when we talk about 5885 and granting that, it has to, the comprehensive service portion specifically refers to actually conserving the detention ponds or and infrastructure that's there, whether it be natural or otherwise. I just want to make sure that legalese of comprehensive service is actually potentially conserving it. Conservation.
Mr. Richardson?
Through your worship, to Councilor Van Popta, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship, and sort of to that effect, I'm curious as to the item C under item 2 in what I believe is 885 removes the golf course land use designation from the Gloucester Industrial Park development concept. And I'm catching up on a lot of history with this application, as we all are. The golf course lands were originally designated as the amenity, and those golf course lands became what are now the wetlands and watercourse. Nature did its work. By removing the golf course land use designation, is that not putting at risk the ability to preserve that as golf course / green space, watercourse, wetlands, whatever have you?
No, Mr. Richardson, I understand the question. I value it. It's good to get this clarified. But to me, the designation, which is why I propose to grant it, the designation for conservation is stronger than golf course. Mr. Richardson, do you have any commentary on this?
Thank you, Worship. The golf course land simply was reflective of the overall development concept at the time, as Councillor Pratt has referred to sort of historically with respect to that. Also as referenced, the senior levels of government requirements in terms of watercourse and other environmental setbacks prevail, whether they're golf course designated lands and they come up for development, or whether they're some other land use designation, whether that be residential or otherwise. The noted amendment to comprehensive service and general industrial, as noted previously, would only permit service and general industrial uses following dedication of those conservation lands.
Okay, I mean, I am concerned because I look at the map and it clearly shows, and I am colorblind, so I apologize, what I believe is purple for the service and general industrial uses, and then a light green for the golf course, which has typically been referred to as the green space, the wetlands we have now. So by approving third reading of the OCP amendment, would the province not look at this map and say, well, it's industrial? And I hear what you're saying about how the industrial and the golf course uses still abide by the same requirements with streamside setbacks, protection, and enhancement. But does it not weaken the case to say that this is important protection, or this is important area that should be protected in the eyes of the province, if we're saying all of a sudden it's no longer green, it's purple or pink, whatever it is?
Mr. Richardson, I think you need to clarify again the designation means.
Thank you, Worship. So currently land use designation only sort of provides for an aligning rezoning to be put in place. So the current proposal would be then to, under the comprehensive service and general industrial, would specifically put the land use designation in place that would speak to the dedication of watercourse conservation areas, and then only permit and service and general industrial uses outside of that.
Okay. So I still have my concerns, especially around Lot 5. I'm not an expert in this field. I kind of look at this as, and I've only heard this motion as everybody else has now, I almost look at this as almost an ALC type referral to a body that we base our own bylaws and guidelines off of, is what I'm hearing from staff. So I have a level of confidence that the province can come back and tell us one way or another what should happen. And at that time, since we still will be coming back at third reading, as I understand it, we'll be able to, if I still have my reservations about specific lots, move an amendment of some kind to the form of the development. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And by that time, you'll have more information from the province.
Right.
Councillor Bailey?
What I like about this amendment is by going to the province, we heard loud and clear that people don't want the developers' QEs or environmental people, because they would be possibly, I gotta watch how I say this, corrupted by who's hiring them. So this would put it to environmental people who are unbiased, who are going to be looking at this and address the concern that that you're going to have qualified people who do not have an interest in developing this into industrial lands. So I like this. I heard that loud and clear, and I like the idea of putting it to a neutral party to make the decision on how much you're supposed to protect, and that under the guidelines of a senior government.
We got some correspondence from the province. I think those were all distributed from council, telling us that they'll be the ones making the decision. So go ahead, go make the decision. Is there any other, Councillor Richter, you wish to move an amendment or further delays?
Yes, I wish to move a deferral of this particular grant and defer motion or refer motion. I'm not quite, this particular, what would you call it?
It's an amendment.
Amendment? This amendment for one meeting so that we can get the written wording of the motion and discuss it with staff if we have questions.
So seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any other discussion on the deferral? Seeing none, call the question on that. That deferral fails. Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Van Popta opposed. Now back to the amendment. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, call the question. The amendment. That carries. Did you vote in time? You're in favor of the amendment. So that amendment carries with Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Richter opposed. This item, bylaws for final adoption.
Your worship,